Let's see how we can make some desserts in Blender. First up, chocolate bar. By the way, all these tutorials are from Ryan King Art that I'm summarizing, so I'll put a link to his channel in the description to go check him out. Start out with a cube, scale it down to 0.1, then 6 on the y-axis, 3 on the x-axis, and 0.5 on the z-axis. Apply that scale. Control R and type 100 to add 100 loop cuts, then do it again long ways, but this time with 50 loop cuts, and one more time on the side with 10 loop cuts. Now we want even more geometry, so add a subdivision surface modifier with 2 levels and then shade smooth. Make the camera look at the chocolate with focal length 70, and add a couple area lights to make it look professional hopefully. Also you can add an HDRI to your world. Some settings are put the look to high contrast and view transform as filmic, or using the Cycles render engine. Now that's all the modelling we will need to be doing for this entire chocolate bar. Yeah, crazy right, because everything else will be done procedurally with the texture nodes in Blender. So add a new material, make sure the node wrangler is enabled and get the Voronoi texture, then change it to these settings. Press Ctrl T with it selected and put object to vector instead. Duplicate mapping node and change all the values like this. Put distance from Voronoi into the height of displacement node, and then that into displacement output. 0.02 scale for displacement. Make sure displacement is set to displacement and bump in render settings. Color ramp after Voronoi and drag it down. Make a base color a dark and reddish hue to look like chocolate. So now it's really starting to come together. Add a bit of subsurface with a dark red color. Lower roughness and subsurface radius all to 1. To make the edges all a bit more rounded, use an RGB curves and drag up from the middle and drag the end one down a little bit as well. Now we want to make a base that's flat so the bottom also doesn't have the pattern. So use a gradient texture and another mapping node like this, then use a color ramp afterwards. Now you want to combine it with the other texture that we made, so use the mix color node to do that, and then put the result of that into the height value of displacement. Now it's very close to being finished, but we can add a noise texture to make it even better. So change the values like this to make chocolate have some more details, then put it into normal and use bump node to make it usable with the height value used and way lower strength. Then the last one is the Musgrave texture to do the same thing as the noise texture, change settings a bit and put it into another bump. So that's the finished procedural chocolate. He puts it into a custom node group afterwards, but I think it's fine for now just to leave it as it is. And we'll do one more to really learn as much as possible. This time he's making a biscuit. He puts in a cylinder, scales to 0.1 like before, and then makes it shorter and uses extrude and scale in a few times to make the faces, and there's more faces. From there he uses proportional editing to curve the top, bevel the edge and some even more geometry with loop cuts. He insets the tops and merges the verts to the center, and then the same thing with the bottom, but this time without adding the curve. Now he adds a subdivision modifier, so he sharpens the bottom edge with another loop cut. He puts the camera focal length to 8 and positions it to look at the biscuit, and then add an HDRI in the background with a very high contrast look. He rotates his HDRI by pressing Ctrl T and using the mapping node to rotate it -90 degrees. In the shader editor he starts with a gradient texture and uses the mapping node the same as before to rotate it, then also moves it down. Color ramp to make it have some more contrast. Voronoi texture below in metallic and a noise texture with some adjusted settings like this. Uses the noise texture for the vector of the Voronoi to distort its placement. Now to mix the Voronoi and color ramp, uses the mix color node with linear light blend mode and factor 1 combining them together. He also adjusts the gradient to be lighter in the color ramp. Mix node into base color and use a color ramp to change the color so that it actually looks like a biscuit. He drags it down and creates 3 different colors for the different areas that make sense. Add a little bit of subsurface as well with an orange subsurface color. Another color ramp that goes into roughness with them both pretty grey to make it look a bit more dry. Right now it's too smooth, so the mix color goes into normal with a bump node in between the height value and less strength. Another bump node with the height from the noise texture to make the edges a bit less smooth. Noise texture goes into displacement with a displacement node in between with low strength. And this time put it into displacement only. So that's the biscuit. I hope this was helpful.